Is there a weariness deep within you today? A fatigue that goes beyond the physical, settling into the very marrow of your soul? Are you tired of stretching out your hand in hope, only to find it grasping at air? Tired of whispering the same prayers into what feels like an indifferent silence? Tired of the relentless effort to keep a flame of optimism alive when the winds of your reality seem determined to extinguish it? Perhaps you've poured out your heart, believing for a change, a healing, a breakthrough, a sign, and the continued stillness, the unyielding struggle has ground you down, leaving you feeling spiritually depleted, perhaps even questioning the very nature of faith itself. If these words describe the landscape of your heart right now, if that profound exhaustion with the act of hoping resonates deeply within you, then please understand this. You are standing on sacred ground, however desolate it may feel. And today, we're going to delve into the profound, often paradoxical wisdom of a remarkable thinker, G.K. Chesterton. He possessed an uncanny ability to see light in the deepest shadows, and he might suggest that this very point of depleted hope, this uncomfortable emptiness, isn't an ending, but potentially a profound new beginning. He once provocatively wrote, "Hope is the power of being cheerful in circumstances which we know to be desperate." Now, how can that possibly be? How can utter desperation coexist with cheerfulness, with a resilient spirit? That is the profound paradox we're going to explore together. This idea might initially feel jarring, perhaps even a little dismissive when you're caught in the grip of such profound weariness. You might think, a new beginning when I feel utterly finished? What about all the hoping I've already done? But Chesterton, a true master of turning conventional notions on their heads to reveal astonishing, deeper truths, isn't invalidating your journey or your past efforts. Instead, he's inviting you to consider a crucial distinction. Perhaps the kind of hope that has withered and died within you was a hope primarily tethered to your own strength, your own expectations, your own understanding of how things should unfold. And its demise, while undeniably painful and disorienting, can paradoxically clear the essential ground for something far more robust, far more divinely anchored to take root and flourish. For those who may be less familiar, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, who lived from 1874 to 1936, was a towering English writer, a keen philosopher, a passionate lay theologian, and an insightful literary critic whose influence continues to ripple through modern thought. He was a man of immense physical presence, matched by an even larger personality, renowned for his sparkling wit, his love of paradox, and his unwavering defense of what he called common sense and orthodox Christian belief. His own path to a deep and abiding faith was not a straightforward or easy one. He courageously navigated through phases of skepticism, doubt, and even a brush with despair before discovering what he beautifully termed the romance of orthodoxy. His seminal works, such as Orthodoxy and the Everlasting Man, reveal a brilliant mind that grappled honestly and profoundly with life's most challenging questions, including the persistent problem of suffering and the very nature of maintaining faith in a world that often appears indifferent, if not hostile, to it. He truly understood that faith wasn't always a sunlit, easy disposition. Sometimes, he recognized, it was a hard-won, tenacious clinging to unseen truth in the midst of profound darkness. So, let's delve into this challenging but ultimately liberating perspective. What does it truly mean when our familiar sense of hope seems to evaporate? And why would a thinker like Chesterton perceive this very depletion not as a final defeat, but a critical juncture where a more authentic, resilient faith can truly begin to emerge?
First, it's vital that we draw a distinction between different qualities, different kinds of hope. There is a natural, very human form of hope, an optimism that is often intrinsically linked to favorable circumstances, to our innate desire for positive outcomes, or to the expectation that our dedicated efforts will and should inevitably yield the specific results we desire. This kind of hope, by its very nature, is inherently fragile. It can be easily shattered when circumstances turn unexpectedly harsh, when heartfelt prayers seem to go unanswered, when our most diligent efforts lead not to success, but to further disappointment and frustration. When you articulate that you are tired of hoping, it is very often this specific kind of hope, this human-generated optimism, that has reached its point of exhaustion. You've invested immense emotional and spiritual energy into believing for a particular outcome, a specific resolution, and it simply hasn't materialized. The wellspring of that particular hope has run dry. Chesterton, however, was a champion of a profoundly different kind of hope, what the Christian tradition refers to as a supernatural virtue, a theological hope. This hope is not, in its essence, dependent on external circumstances, fluctuating feelings, or predictable outcomes. Its anchor lies not in the visible world, but in the immutable character and the steadfast promises of God Himself. It is the deep, abiding conviction that, regardless of what we currently see or painfully experience in our immediate reality, God is fundamentally good, God is ultimately sovereign, and God is mysteriously and wonderfully working all things together for His divine glory and for the true, eternal good of those who love Him, even if that good looks radically different from our own limited definitions and heartfelt desires. So when your circumstantial hope, your self-generated optimism finally crumbles and dies, it inevitably creates a void, an emptiness. And it is precisely within this uncomfortable void, Chesterton might compellingly suggest, that true God-given faith, or a more mature, refined version of it, finally has the necessary space to be truly born or to deepen its roots. But why is this so? The necessary end of self-reliance. As long as we subconsciously or consciously believe that our hope is primarily generated by our own positive attitude, sustained by our own spiritual disciplines, or dependent on our own strength of will, we are still, in a very fundamental sense, relying on ourselves. We are the source of our own hoping. When that edifice of self-reliance finally shatters, when we reach the point of utter honesty and admit, I cannot sustain this anymore. I cannot manufacture hope out of nothing. I truly have nothing left within myself to draw upon. We are perhaps for the first time standing in a posture of genuine humility and complete dependence. This, paradoxically, is incredibly fertile ground for God to begin His deeper work. Real, enduring faith isn't ultimately about our strength, our capacity, our resilience. It's about His. Chesterton once wisely wrote, "A man was meant to be doubtful about himself, but undoubting about the truth." This has been exactly reversed. When we find ourselves utterly tired of hoping based on our own internal resources, our own flagging spirits, we might finally and liberatingly become undoubting about the external objective truth of God's unwavering faithfulness. The profound invitation to deeper trust. When our easy hope, the hope that thrives in fair weather, is gone, we are confronted with a stark, defining choice. We can abandon the path of faith altogether, succumbing to cynicism or despair, or we can choose to trust God in a way we have never dared or needed to before. A trust that is no longer contingent on visible outcomes, positive feelings, or our own intellectual understanding of His plans. This is the very essence of a mature, tested faith. It's the faith of Abraham, who, as the Scriptures say, against all hope, in hope believed. Romans 4:18. It's the raw, anguished faith of Job, who, amidst unimaginable loss, declared, "Though He slay me, yet will I trust Him." Job 13:15. Chesterton, who perceived faith not as a dull obligation but as a grand, unpredictable adventure, knew that all true adventures inevitably involve periods of bewildering darkness, profound uncertainty, and apparent dead ends, where the only viable option is to trust the guide implicitly, even when his presence feels distant or his directions make no immediate sense.
The painful clarification of what we're truly hoping for. Sometimes, the agonizing death of our specific, cherished hopes forces us into a crucial, soul-searching examination of what or who we were truly pinning our ultimate hopes on. Were we fundamentally hoping for comfort, for a particular earthly outcome, for our meticulously crafted plans to succeed according to our timeline? Or is our deepest, truest hope ultimately fixed in God Himself, in His abiding presence, in the coming of His kingdom, in the fulfillment of His eternal promises, which often transcend our immediate comprehension? When superficial, circumstantial hopes die, it can serve to purify our often mixed desires and reorient our ultimate hope towards that which truly lasts, that which rust and moth cannot destroy. Chesterton frequently highlighted the solid joys and lasting treasure that authentic Christianity offers, distinguishing them sharply from the fleeting, often illusory satisfactions of the world. He understood the Augustinian truth that our hearts are inherently restless until they find their ultimate rest in God. And sometimes the painful collapse of our lesser, more tangible hopes is the very thing that nudges us or even shoves us towards that singular, all-sufficient rest. The startling paradox of strength found in utter weakness. The narrative of Scripture is richly interwoven with this profound, counterintuitive theme. Consider, for instance, 2 Corinthians 12, 9-10. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." When we arrive at the absolute end of our own hoping strength, when we have no reserves left to draw upon, it is precisely then that we are most profoundly open to experiencing God's divine strength in a new and transformative way. Chesterton, with his deep appreciation and articulation of divine paradox, would undoubtedly relish this spiritual irony. He once quipped with characteristic insight, "The way to love anything is to realize that it might be lost." Similarly, perhaps the pathway to truly discovering and embracing divine, unshakable hope is first to realize, through painful experience, that our purely human, self-generated hope can indeed be lost, and in fact, for many of us, has been lost. That very experience of loss, that emptiness, can make us utterly desperate for something far more enduring, something that originates outside of ourselves. Consider Chesterton's own life and the vast body of his writings. He consistently championed the wisdom of the common man and the reliability of common sense. But his understanding of common sense was always radiantly illuminated by an almost palpable sense of the miraculous woven into the fabric of the ordinary. He perceived the world as being charged with the grandeur of God, imbued with profound meaning and divine purpose, even when its surface appeared chaotic, random, or senselessly cruel. This wasn't a naive, Pollyannish optimism on his part, but a deep-seated, intellectually robust conviction rooted in his understanding of God as a fundamentally good, infinitely rational, and supremely loving creator, a master artist who knows his craft intimately and is always at work. When our personal hope feels utterly lost, it can be akin to staring at a small, confusing, perhaps deeply shadowed and troubling section of an immense, intricate tapestry. From our limited ground-level vantage point, that particular patch makes no sense. It may even appear ugly or flawed. But Chesterton would gently remind us that the divine artist sees the whole, magnificent design and is patiently, skillfully weaving something extraordinarily beautiful, even if the specific threads we are currently experiencing are dark, tangled, or painful to the touch. The state of being tired of hoping is often, if we allow it to be, a state of profound and courageous spiritual honesty. You are no longer engaging in pretense. You are no longer expending precious energy trying to put on a brave face for yourself or for others. You are acknowledging with raw vulnerability the stark reality of your weariness, your disappointment, your disillusionment. And this very honesty, this stripping away of all illusions and self-deceptions can become a profound unspoken prayer in itself, a sacred emptiness that allows God to meet you precisely at your point of deepest, most desperate need. Now, how can we begin to apply this rather challenging yet potentially liberating Chestertonian perspective when we are genuinely immersed in that desolate place of exhausted hope? Maybe you are navigating something incredibly arduous, something that has stretched your endurance to its breaking point. Perhaps you have prayed fervently for years for a prodigal child to find their way back, and they seem further estranged than ever. Maybe you have battled a debilitating chronic illness, clinging to the hope of a healing that has consistently failed to materialize. Perhaps your marriage, despite your most sincere and sustained efforts, feels like it is inexorably crumbling. Maybe you are facing the terrifying prospect of financial ruin, or you are lost in a deep spiritual desert where God feels utterly absent, and His silence is deafening. In such moments, the temptation to give up entirely, to abandon all faith, can be overwhelming.
Acknowledge and validate the death of your old hope and grieve its passing. It is not only okay, but essential to feel the full spectrum of emotions: sadness, anger, confusion, disillusionment, that arise when the specific things you fervently hoped for haven't materialized in the way you envisioned or desperately needed. Do not attempt to rush past this process or condemn yourself for these very human feelings. Chesterton was no advocate for stoic suppression. He possessed a deep understanding of the complexities of human emotion. Allowing yourself to fully feel and process this loss, without self-judgment, is a vital first step towards healing and the possibility of a new kind of hope. This experience isn't necessarily a failure of your faith. It is a natural human response to profound and prolonged disappointment. Consciously shift your focus from the desired outcome to the divine person. When you find yourself utterly tired of hoping for a specific result, for a particular change in your circumstances, make a deliberate, conscious effort to shift the anchor of your hope to a person, to God Himself in His unchanging essence. Instead of the prayer being, "I hope this terrible situation changes soon," try to reframe it, even if through gritted teeth at first. "God, I honestly do not understand what you were doing, or if this painful situation will ever change in the way I so deeply desire. But today, in this moment, I choose to place my ultimate hope not in circumstances, but in your immutable character, your goodness, your love, your wisdom, your sovereignty, your faithfulness that endures through all generations." This is a profound, courageous act of faith, choosing to trust the who of God, even when the what, why, and when of your life remain shrouded in painful mystery. Embrace the nevertheless principle of faith. Think of Simon Peter, as recorded in the Gospels, after a long, fruitless night of fishing. He expressed his exhaustion and failure to Jesus. "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything." His experience, his logic, his feelings all screamed futility. "But because you say so, nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net." Luke 5:5. He acted in obedience to Christ's word in spite of his overwhelming feelings and discouraging experience. When your own well of hope feels completely dry, ask God for the grace, the sheer spiritual grit to utter your own nevertheless. "I feel utterly hopeless, Lord. Nevertheless, I will continue to open your word. I see no tangible change in my circumstances. Nevertheless, I will choose to believe in your unseen work behind the scenes. I am profoundly tired, Lord. Nevertheless, I will take the next small, obedient step of faithfulness that you place before me. Allow God to redefine what victory or answered prayer truly looks like. Often, our hopes are inextricably tied to a very specific earthly and sometimes narrow definition of success, resolution, or blessing. Chesterton, deeply steeped in the richness of Christian tradition, understood that God's ways are infinitely higher and more complex than our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. Perhaps the answer to your deepest prayers isn't the immediate removal of the trial, but rather the miraculous provision of sufficient grace within the trial. Perhaps it is the forging of Christ-like character, the development of patience, compassion, or a deeper empathy for others who suffer. Perhaps it's the cultivation of a more profound intimacy with Christ, who himself knew suffering intimately. Victory in God's economy might look like steadfast perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds, unwavering faithfulness in the prolonged darkness, or becoming an unexpected beacon of God's improbable love and grace to others, even from amidst your own unresolved pain. Practice as if, living out truths you may not currently feel. This is not about being inauthentic or engaging in denial, but about courageously choosing to act on the objective truth of God's character and promises, even when your emotions are lagging far behind or screaming the opposite. Chesterton once wrote, with his usual knack for precision, "To have a right to do a thing is not at all the same as to be right in doing it." We might not feel particularly hopeful or strong or faithful, but as children of God, we have a right, given by his grace, to act as people who are ultimately and securely anchored in an eternal, unshakable hope. So continue, as best you can, with spiritual disciplines, prayer, even if it's just groaning, reading scripture, even if it feels like dry dust, fellowship, even if it's hard to show up. Continue to love and serve others, however humbly. Continue to speak truth, both to yourself and to others, as if you fully and vibrantly believe God is actively at work. Because faith, by its very definition, declares that he is. Sometimes, astonishingly, the feelings of hope and peace eventually follow the determined, often faltering, actions of faith. Diligently look for the fingerprints of God, often in the most unexpected places. Chesterton possessed an almost childlike, wide-eyed capacity for wonder, a readiness to be astonished by the mundane. Even when your grand, overarching hopes seem to have been completely dashed, are there perhaps small, subtle graces, tiny, almost hidden evidences of God's presence or provision that you might be overlooking in your pain or weariness? A moment of unexpected, unbidden peace amidst turmoil, a kind, understanding word from a stranger, the resilient beauty of nature pushing through concrete, a line of scripture or a forgotten hymn that suddenly illuminates your darkness with a flicker of meaning. These small things don't negate the magnitude of your pain, but they can be precious, personal whispers from God, assuring you that he hasn't completely abandoned you. They are the unlooked-for joys, the surprising gifts that Chesterton so often celebrated as tokens of divine delight.
Remember, crucially, that you are not alone in this profound experience. Many of the greatest figures in the history of faith, those we often look up to as giants, experienced profound and prolonged periods of spiritual desolation, times when hope seemed utterly lost and God felt terrifyingly absent. Read the raw, unfiltered Psalms of lament. Read about the despair of Elijah under the juniper tree, begging God to take his life. Read the writings of the great mystics who eloquently describe the painful but transformative journey through the dark night of the soul. Your current exhaustion with hoping, your sense of spiritual emptiness, doesn't disqualify you from the company of the saints. It may, in fact, place you squarely and honorably among them. Jesus himself, in the agony of Gethsemane and on the cruel desolation of the cross, experienced unimaginable suffering and the piercing sense of divine abandonment. If even he, the Son of God, cried out in anguish, my God, why have you forsaken me?" then our own moments of feeling forsaken are not definitive proof that God has truly left us, but perhaps a sacred, albeit painful entry into the deep fellowship of his sufferings, and ultimately into the power of his resurrection. This profound journey from an exhausted, depleted human hope to a resilient, God-given divine faith is rarely easy or quick. It is often a long, slow, arduous process, marked by setbacks and moments of doubt. But the enduring wisdom of Chesterton encourages us that this painful shedding of our self-reliant, circumstance-based hope can be a sacred stripping away, a necessary emptying that makes room for God to build something far stronger, far more deeply and unshakably rooted in his own infinite faithfulness and unchanging love. It is, in its very essence, a transformative movement from hoping in hope itself, or in our ability to hope, to hoping wholly and completely in God. So as you sit with your own weariness today, I want to gently invite you to consider this. What specific hope, what cherished expectation has died or is currently dying within you? And could it be in the strange and wonderful economy of God that this very weariness, this profound feeling of being at the absolute end of your own resources and your own ability to conjure hope, is actually God's subtle, loving invitation to discover a hope that is not manufactured by you, but is graciously and abundantly gifted by Him. A hope that is not precariously based on what you can see or control, but is securely founded on who He is, in all His eternal majesty and tender mercy. I would be deeply moved and honored to hear your thoughts and reflections on this. What aspect of this Chestertonian perspective on being tired of hoping resonates most powerfully with your own experience? Have you ever lived through a time when the agonizing death of one kind of hope paradoxically opened the door to a deeper, more resilient, God-centered faith? Please feel welcome to share your experiences, your ongoing struggles, your questions, and your insights in the comment section below. Your story, shared with vulnerability and courage, might be the very lifeline, the flicker of renewed possibility that someone else, also profoundly tired of hoping, needs to grasp today. Let's walk this often challenging but ultimately rewarding path together, learning to find our true and lasting anchor when the seas of life are at their roughest and most overwhelming. Thank you for joining me in pondering these deep, vital, and ultimately hope-filled truths. May you, even and especially in your weariness, find the quiet courage to let go of exhausted, earthbound hopes, and in that sacred act of letting go, may you discover the surprising, tenacious, and ultimately triumphant hope that so often begins precisely where our own strength ends, a hope firmly and eternally anchored in the unchanging love, the infinite wisdom, and the sovereign power of God.